A cheap plastic pregnancy test can become a weapon that destroys everything you thought you knew about family. I know because it happened to me, and what followed was so shocking that I still sometimes wake up wondering if it was real. My name is Shannon. I'm 27 years old, and for 3 years I raised 5 children that weren't mine, while my sister Cassie played house with her boyfriend and my grandmother orchestrated the most elaborate betrayal I could never have imagined. The truth is, I couldn't believe how far they'd go. Identity theft, fraud, false accusations, until I found myself sitting in a police station defending myself against charges filed by the same sister who'd been systematically destroying my credit and my future. But here's the secret nobody tells you about family drama. Sometimes the people who preach loyalty the loudest are the ones who've backstabbed you the deepest, and the moment I discovered what they'd done, I knew that walking away wasn't enough. I needed justice, I needed payback, and I needed to reclaim the dignity they'd been stripping from me one manipulation at a time. What happened next exposed a web of lies so intricate, revealed a level of exploitation so calculated, that even the detectives investigating my case were shocked at how my own blood had cheated me out of my 20s. This is the story of how I went from being my family's ATM machine to the woman who watched their entire toxic empire collapse. And I won't lie, there were moments when the revenge felt better than I'd ever admit out loud. If you've ever felt humiliated by people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been lied to by family who claimed it was for your own good, if you've ever wondered what it takes to finally say enough and mean it, then this story is for you. Because the truth about what happened to me changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, infidelity to family values, and what real karma actually looks like. I still remember the exact moment I saw that cheap plastic stick sitting on the bathroom counter. 2 bright pink lines staring back at me like a cruel joke I'd heard one too many times. My name is Shannon. I'm 27 years old, and I work as an operations supervisor at a distribution center in Phoenix. But for the past 3 years, my real job has been raising 5 kids that aren't mine. My sister Cassie stood in the doorway of our cramped living room, grinning like she'd just won the lottery, while her boyfriend Marcus sat on the couch scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. The toys were scattered everywhere, baby bottles piled in the sink, and I could already feel the weight of what was coming. The bills, the diapers, the sleepless nights that somehow always became my responsibility. "Becca, isn't it amazing?" Cassie squealed, waving that test in the air like it was a trophy, and all I could think was, how did I become the one expected to celebrate my own continued imprisonment? That pregnancy test felt like a betrayal in itself, another chain added to the ones already wrapped around my wrists, cutting deeper into my dignity every single day. I couldn't believe that after everything, after 3 years of sacrificing my paycheck, my sleep, my dreams of going back to school, she was doing this again, and worse, she expected me to smile about it. Cassie had always been the golden child in our family, the one who could do no wrong in our grandmother Doris's eyes, while I was the responsible one, the fixer, the ATM machine that never ran out. The truth was, I'd been backstabbed by my own blood so many times I'd stopped counting the scars. But this 6th pregnancy, felt like the final humiliation, the moment when I realized I'd been cheated out of my own life. Every time I tried to save money for my online degree or put aside something for myself, there was always another emergency, another mouth to feed, another excuse why Cassie couldn't possibly work or why Marcus couldn't keep a job for more than 2 months. Justice felt like a fantasy I'd stopped believing in somewhere between the 3rd diaper change and the 100th grocery run I funded alone. My days started at 5 in the morning, getting the kids ready, packing lunches, dropping them at school before my shift, and ended past midnight when I finally collapsed into bed, only to do it all over again. Cassie would sleep until noon, then spend her afternoons on her phone, planning baby names and posting about how blessed she was, while I was the one actually keeping those blessings fed and clothed. The family drama had always existed, whispers and tensions beneath the surface, but it exploded into something darker when I started asking questions about where my money was really going. Grandma Doris lived with us too, a woman who'd spent 72 years perfecting the art of manipulation, and she'd made it crystal clear that I owed this family everything: my time, my money, my future, because that's what good girls do. Self-worth became a foreign concept, something I vaguely remembered having before I moved back home to help Cassie with her first baby, back when I thought it would be temporary. Now, 3 years and 5 children later, temporary had become permanent, and I was drowning in a sea of formula cans and unpaid bills with my name on them. The shocking part wasn't that Cassie kept getting pregnant. It was that everyone acted like I was selfish for finally feeling exhausted, like wanting my own life was some kind of moral failure. When I tried to talk to Grandma Doris about boundaries, she looked at me with those cold gray eyes and said, "Family takes care of family, Shannon. Your sister needs you. Those babies need you. Don't be so selfish." The word selfish hit me like a slap, especially coming from a woman who'd never worked a day in her life, but always had opinions about how I should spend my paycheck. Revenge wasn't something I'd ever considered. I'm not that kind of person. But standing there watching Cassie parade around with that positive test, something inside me finally cracked. I realized I'd been lied to, over and over again, told that things would get better, that Cassie would get her act together, that this sacrifice was temporary and meaningful. But the infidelity wasn't romantic. It was familial, a complete violation of the trust I'd placed in people who were supposed to love me, not use me like an endless resource. My nephew Tyler, who was 12, looked at me from the kitchen table where he was trying to do homework, and I saw something in his eyes, pity, maybe, or recognition that I was trapped in a cage of my own family's making. Tyler had always been sharp for his age, the kind of kid who spent hours on his laptop teaching himself things the school hadn't covered yet, and I could tell he understood far more about our family's dysfunction than any 12-year-old should. I smiled at him weakly, trying to pretend everything was fine, but we both knew the truth. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my car in the driveway and finally let myself cry. Not pretty tears, but the ugly, gasping kind that come from years of suppressed anger and humiliation. The karma I'd been promised, the idea that good things come to those who sacrifice, felt like the biggest lie I'd ever been sold. Cassie had announced this pregnancy like it was a celebration, but all I could hear was the sound of my own dreams shattering into smaller and smaller pieces. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. Something had to change, or I was going to lose myself completely, but I had no idea that within 2 weeks, Cassie would make a demand so outrageous, so insulting, that it would finally give me the clarity I needed to see this family for what it really was. The explosion happened on a Tuesday evening when Cassie cornered me in the kitchen, Grandma Doris standing behind her like a sentinel of manipulation, both of them wearing expressions that told me they'd rehearsed this conversation. "Becca, we need to talk about your car," Cassie started, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew exactly where this was going. My 12-year-old Honda Civic, the one thing I owned outright, the one piece of independence I had left. She explained, with Grandma Doris nodding along like a Greek chorus, that since the baby was coming and they needed a bigger vehicle, the most logical solution was for me to sell my car and contribute that money to buy them a minivan. I stood there gripping the edge of the counter, trying to process the sheer audacity of what they were asking, and when I said absolutely not, the room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Cassie's face twisted into something ugly, and she fired back. "After everything this family has done for you? We gave you a place to live, Becca." The betrayal of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I was paying 70% of the rent, all the utilities, and buying every single grocery that entered this house. But somehow in their twisted narrative, I was the one receiving charity. Grandma Doris stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness, and suggested that maybe I should also consider postponing my online classes since the family needed my full attention and resources right now. Full attention, like I wasn't already working 50-hour weeks and raising 5 children single-handedly while their actual parents treated life like an extended vacation. The shocking part was how entitled they were, How genuinely confused they seemed that I might have plans for my own future that didn't revolve around funding Cassie's reproductive choices. I couldn't believe I'd let it get this far, that I'd normalized this level of exploitation until it felt like breathing polluted air. You don't notice you're suffocating until someone opens a window. The family betrayal deepened over the next few days as they launched a coordinated campaign to break me down, with Grandma Doris making passive-aggressive comments about selfish young women who forget their roots, and Cassie suddenly becoming too stressed and fragile to handle any childcare responsibilities. Marcus, who usually stayed silent, even chimed in with a speech about how we're all supposed to pull together, which was rich coming from a man who'd been unemployed for 8 months and spent his days playing video games. But then something happened that changed everything. My friend Tessa, who works as a paralegal downtown, called me during my lunch break with a question that made my blood run cold. She asked if I'd recently opened any new credit accounts, because her firm had flagged some suspicious activity with someone using my name and social security number. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. That evening, I logged into the credit monitoring site I'd set up years ago but hadn't checked in months, and what I found made me feel physically sick. 3 credit cards opened in my name over the past 18 months, all with significant balances, and a store financing account for furniture I'd never purchased. The addresses listed were our home address. The purchase dates coincided with times when I'd been at work, and suddenly all those packages that Cassie said were gifts from Marcus's mom made horrifying sense. Backstabbed didn't begin to cover what I felt. This was identity theft, criminal fraud, a violation so deep that it shattered whatever remained of my ability to see this situation as just difficult family dynamics. I sat in my room staring at the screen, watching my credit score that I'd worked so hard to build collapse before my eyes, and the humiliation of realizing I'd been this blind, this trusting, was almost worse than the financial damage. The truth was screaming at me from every transaction detail, every lie I'd been told about where money was going, and I finally understood that this wasn't love. This was exploitation dressed up in the language of family obligation. Payback wasn't what I wanted. I wanted justice, real justice, not the emotional kind where everyone apologizes and promises to change. I called Tessa back, my voice barely above a whisper because the walls in this house were thin, and the last thing I needed was for them to know I'd discovered their scheme. She told me to document everything, to quietly gather my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, bank statements, and to be prepared to file a police report, but she also warned me that this was going to get ugly. Family drama was one thing, but criminal charges against your own sister, potentially involving your grandmother as an accomplice, was something else entirely. Tyler knocked on my door around midnight, and when I opened it, he handed me a folded piece of paper and ran back to his room before I could say anything. The note said, "Aunt Becca, I heard Mom and Grandma talking about hiding some papers in the basement. I'm sorry. I love you. T." That piece of paper became my proof that at least one person in this house saw me as human, not as a resource to be mined until there was nothing left. The vengeance that started building in my chest wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and calculated. The kind that comes from finally accepting that you're not dealing with family who made mistakes, but with people who would destroy you without a second thought if it benefited them. I started making plans, quietly packing a bag with essentials and hiding it in my car trunk, opening a new bank account at a different institution and rerouting my direct deposit, and most importantly, reaching out to a few trusted friends who could help me disappear when the time was right. Cassie and Grandma Doris noticed nothing. So confident were they in their control over me, so certain that I would eventually cave like I always did. But what they didn't understand was that every humiliation, every manipulation, every stolen dollar had been building towards something, and karma was about to knock on their door with a warrant. The escape happened on a Saturday night, 3 weeks after I'd discovered the credit fraud, 3 weeks of playing the compliant daughter and sister while secretly dismantling my entire life from the inside out. I'd told everyone I was working a late inventory shift, which wasn't unusual. I'd been picking up extra hours for the family, though really I was stockpiling cash in my new secret account. Tessa had helped me rent a small studio apartment across town, paid for with money orders so there'd be no paper trail they could follow, and my friend Marcus, different Marcus, my co-worker, had agreed to help me move my essentials while the house was asleep. The truth was, I was terrified, not of leaving, but of the moment when they'd realize I was gone, and understand that their cash cow had finally broken free. I'd spent years being lied to about what family meant, and now I was about to reclaim my dignity in the only way that mattered, by walking away from people who saw me as nothing more than a source of funds. Tyler had become my unlikely ally, slipping me information about Grandma Doris's hiding spot in the basement where she'd stashed documents, including copies of those fraudulent credit applications with my forged signature. The kid was smarter than anyone gave him credit for, and I think part of him understood that if I went down, the whole house of cards would collapse, and he'd be left dealing with the aftermath. I'd promised him nothing would happen to the kids, that I'd make sure they were taken care of even if I couldn't be the one doing it anymore, and he'd nodded with a maturity that broke my heart. That night, while Cassie and Marcus were passed out and Grandma Doris was snoring in her room, I moved through the house like a ghost, taking only what was legally mine: my documents, my laptop, my clothes, and photographs of receipts I'd been collecting that showed exactly how much money I'd poured into this bottomless pit. The shocking thing was how little I actually owned after 3 years of working myself to death. By 2 a.m, my car was packed, and I stood in the driveway taking one last look at the house that had been my prison, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The betrayal still stung, not because I didn't know it was happening, but because some naive part of me had kept hoping they'd realize what they were doing and stop. But family betrayal is different from other kinds because it comes wrapped in obligation and guilt, dressed up as love when it's really just control. I'd been cheated out of my 20s, humiliated every time I had to explain to friends why I couldn't go out because I was babysitting my sister's kids again, and shamed into believing that wanting my own life made me a bad person. As I drove away, leaving behind no note or explanation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the weight of revenge, but not the destructive kind. This was the revenge of refusing to participate in your own exploitation anymore. The first week in my new place was strange and quiet, almost too quiet after years of chaos and crying babies and constant demands. Tessa had advised me to go completely no contact, to block their numbers and social media, because the moment they realized I wasn't coming back, the manipulation would shift into overdrive. She was right. Within 48 hours of my disappearance, my phone exploded with messages that progressed from confused to angry to threatening in record time. Cassie sent voicemails crying about how I'd abandoned the kids. Grandma Doris left messages calling me every name in the book, and Marcus, the boyfriend, actually had the audacity to text that I was ruining a good thing we had going. The lack of self-awareness would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. They genuinely couldn't understand that you can't exploit someone indefinitely and expect them to stick around once they realize they have options. But Tyler sent me one text that made it all worth it. "Aunt Becca, I know why you left. I'm glad you're safe. Don't worry about us. I've been recording things." That last sentence sent chills down my spine because I hadn't told him to do that. The kid had seen what was coming and prepared on his own. Justice started to feel possible, not just as an abstract concept, but as something real I could actually touch. I'd already filed police reports about the identity theft, armed with all my documentation, and Tessa had connected me with a detective who specialized in fraud cases. The wheels were turning slowly, but they were turning, and every day that passed was another day where I wasn't funding someone else's irresponsibility. My self-worth started to rebuild in tiny increments, making decisions about what to eat without worrying about 5 other people, going to bed without checking if all the doors were locked and the kids were okay, actually having money left in my account after payday. Then came the call I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit wanted to know if I'd press charges against my sister and potentially my grandmother for the credit fraud. The question hung in the air, and I thought about all the times I'd been told that family doesn't do that to family, as if betrayal only counted when it came from strangers. But the truth was, Cassie had already pressed charges against me in the court of family opinion, painting me as the villain for daring to save myself. Karma was offering me a choice: let it go and rebuild in peace, or make sure they faced consequences for what they'd done. I took a deep breath and told the detective yes, I wanted to press charges, and I'd cooperate fully with the investigation. What I didn't know yet was that Cassie was about to make a move so reckless, so desperate, that it would take the decision about justice completely out of my hands. The false accusation came exactly 2 weeks after I'd moved out, delivered by 2 police officers knocking on my apartment door at 7 in the morning, and for a moment I thought the credit fraud investigation had moved faster than expected. Instead, they informed me that my sister had filed a report claiming I'd stolen $5,000 in cash from the house, along with jewelry that belonged to our grandmother, and would I be willing to come down to the station to answer some questions. My stomach dropped as I realized what Cassie was doing. She was trying to flip the script, to make me the criminal before the investigators could focus on her. And the shocking audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. I told the officers I'd come voluntarily with my attorney present, which made them exchange glances because innocent people don't usually lawyer up immediately. But Tessa had drilled into me that I needed to protect myself at every turn. The humiliation of having cops at my door, of neighbors peeking through curtains, was exactly what Cassie wanted, to publicly shame me back into compliance. At the station, with Tessa sitting beside me, I explained the entire situation to the detective: the 3 years of financial support, the identity theft, the fraudulent credit cards, and my carefully documented escape. I couldn't believe I had to defend myself against charges filed by the same person who'd been systematically stealing from me, but that's how family betrayal works. They know exactly which buttons to push, which lies will sound believable to outsiders who don't know the full story. The detective seemed skeptical of Cassie's version, especially when I provided bank statements showing that I'd never had $5,000 in cash at any point. And when I mentioned the credit fraud case already in progress, his expression shifted. He asked if I had any proof of Cassie's fraudulent activities, and I pulled out my folder of documentation, credit reports, forged signatures, purchase records, and watched his eyebrows raise as he realized this was bigger than a simple he said she said family dispute. Then Tessa dropped the bomb that changed everything. She mentioned that there might be video evidence because Tyler had told me he'd been recording things, though I wasn't entirely sure what he meant. The detective asked if we could get access to that evidence, and I sent Tyler a carefully worded text asking if he was safe and if he still had what he'd mentioned before. His response came back within minutes. Yes, I have videos of Mom going through your room and taking stuff. I have her and Grandma talking about setting you up. I saved everything to the cloud because I knew she'd try to delete it. Can the police protect us if I share it? My heart broke reading that message. A 13-year-old kid having to think about witness protection because his own mother was that corrupt. But it also filled me with something that felt dangerously close to vindication. Justice was no longer just a fantasy. It had evidence and timestamps. Over the next few weeks, everything moved with the slow but relentless machinery of the legal system. Detective Martinez contacted CPS because Tyler's message raised concerns about the children's welfare in a household with criminal activity and potential retaliation risks. And a second detective was assigned to review Tyler's videos after multiple interviews with everyone involved. What they found was damning. Footage of Cassie going through my room after I'd left, specifically looking for cash or valuables she could report as stolen. Videos of her and Grandma Doris discussing how to make Shannon come back by filing false charges, and recordings of them coaching Marcus on what to say if police questioned him. The backstabbed feeling I'd been living with for years crystallized into something harder and colder as I watched my own family plot against me with the casualness of people discussing dinner plans. The truth was laid bare in high definition, and there was no gaslighting or manipulation that could explain away video evidence of premeditated fraud. Cassie's plan had backfired spectacularly. Not only were the theft charges against me dropped immediately, but now she was facing charges for filing a false police report, credit fraud, identity theft, and potentially conspiracy if they could prove Grandma Doris was an active participant. The exposed lies unraveled faster than any revenge I could have orchestrated myself, because the truth has a way of destroying carefully constructed facades once someone shines a light on them. Detective Martinez called me to explain that they'd executed a search warrant on the house, recovering documents related to the credit fraud and finding evidence that Grandma Doris had indeed been forging my signature and coaching Cassie on how to open accounts without getting caught. The infidelity of it, the betrayal of trust by the very people who claimed to love me, was almost too massive to process. I sat in my tiny apartment listening to him describe the evidence, and part of me felt vindicated while another part just felt profoundly sad that it had come to this. But Tyler's bravery in coming forward, in being willing to expose his own mother's criminal behavior to protect me, was what finally broke through my emotional numbness. The detective assured me that CPS was working to ensure the kids would be safe, regardless of what happened to Cassie, and that Tyler's actions might have saved his younger siblings from years of living in a household where crime and manipulation were normalized. Payback had arrived not through my actions, but through the consequences of Cassie's own choices. And I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be complicit in someone else's destruction of themselves. Karma, it turns out, doesn't need help. It just needs you to step out of its way and let people face what they've created. What I didn't know yet was just how completely that karma was about to dismantle every part of the toxic system that had kept me trapped for 3 years. The consequences rolled in like a tsunami over the following month, each wave crashing harder than the last, and I watched from the safety of my new life as everything Cassie and Grandma Doris had built on my back collapsed into rubble. CPS conducted a full investigation of the household, and what they found went beyond financial exploitation. There was evidence of neglect, with the kids frequently missing school, medical appointments skipped, and the house in conditions that violated basic safety standards. The shocking part was that I'd been so busy keeping everyone fed and paying bills that I hadn't fully registered how bad things had gotten in other areas. Though Tyler's videos showed that once I left, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Cassie was still pregnant with the 6th child when CPS intervened, but the 5 children who had already been born were the immediate concern. Within 2 weeks of the investigation's start, all 5 were removed from Cassie's custody and placed in foster care temporarily while CPS worked to find family placement. And the guilt I felt about that was crushing until Tyler sent me a message saying, "Aunt Becca, it's actually better here. We get 3 meals a day and nobody's screaming. Don't feel bad." Cassie's world imploded completely when Marcus, her boyfriend, the father of 2 of her children, packed up and left the morning after CPS took the kids, texting her that he didn't sign up for this drama and blocking her on everything. The betrayal of him abandoning her in her darkest moment would have been poetic if there weren't children involved, but it proved what I'd suspected all along. Their relationship was built on convenience and my financial support, not love. Without me funding their lifestyle and handling all the childcare, Marcus saw no reason to stick around, and Cassie was left completely alone in a house she couldn't afford, facing criminal charges, heavily pregnant, and minus the 5 children she'd used as props in her victimhood narrative. Grandma Doris tried to position herself as the innocent bystander, but the evidence showed she'd been an active participant in the fraud, and her self-worth apparently couldn't survive the realization that her golden child had destroyed the family she claimed to protect. The legal consequences came swift. Cassie pled out on multiple charges to avoid trial, receiving probation, massive fines, and an order to pay restitution for the credit fraud, though everyone knew she'd never be able to pay back what she'd stolen. Her criminal record meant finding employment would be nearly impossible, and the judgment on her credit report ensured she wouldn't be fraudulently opening accounts in anyone's name again. Grandma Doris faced charges too, though the prosecutor was more lenient given her age, but the court determined she could no longer live independently and needed supervised care. The family drama reached its crescendo when Doris was placed in a state-funded nursing facility because there was no one left to take her in. Cassie was broke and facing her own legal issues. I'd made it clear I would never provide care for someone who'd abused me, and other relatives who'd always sided with them suddenly became very unavailable. The justice of it was almost biblical. The woman who'd preached family obligation her entire life was abandoned by that same family when she needed them. Tyler reached out through CPS to ask if I'd consider being a placement option for him and his siblings, and that conversation broke something open in me that I'd been keeping carefully locked. I wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to gather those kids up and give them the stability they deserved, but I also knew I couldn't go back to being their parent without boundaries and proper support. Through Tessa's firm, I worked with CPS to create a plan where I'd have guardianship with financial assistance and therapeutic support for the kids, with the explicit understanding that Cassie would have no access or decision-making power. The reclaiming of my role in their lives had to be done on my terms, not as an obligation, but as a choice I was making with full support and resources. It took 3 months to finalize, but eventually Tyler and his 2 youngest siblings came to live with me, while the other 2 were placed with Marcus's sister who'd never been involved in the exploitation. The dignity I'd lost over 3 years started returning in unexpected moments. The first time I took the kids to a therapist and didn't have to pay out of pocket because CPS provided funding. The first time I attended a parent-teacher conference without Cassie undermining everything I said. The first time I realized my bank account was growing instead of being drained. The infidelity of family members who steal from you leaves scars that don't heal quickly. But watching Tyler thrive in an environment where his basic needs were met without drama, where he could just be a kid instead of a witness to dysfunction, made every difficult moment of the escape worth it. Cassie sent letters through her public defender, trying to negotiate visits with the kids, but Tyler's therapist recommended against it until she'd completed significant rehabilitation and proven stability. Cheated out of motherhood by her own actions, Cassie had no one to blame but herself. Though predictably she tried blaming me in every conversation anyone would listen to. The truth that emerged from all of this was simpler than I'd expected. Families that function on exploitation and guilt don't survive when the exploited member refuses to participate anymore. My self-worth had been so eroded I'd forgotten I had the right to say no, to demand basic respect, to expect that love wouldn't come with a price tag attached. The karma that had befallen Cassie and Grandma Doris wasn't something I'd orchestrated. It was simply the natural consequence of living a life built on lies and theft. But while their world had collapsed, mine was slowly rebuilding, brick by brick, decision by decision. And I was learning that sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. It's the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people watching you model what self-respect looks like. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and for the first time in years, I was the one writing it. The transformation started small. A tech internship that Tessa's firm helped me secure with a company looking for operations managers with my specific skill set, offering twice what I'd been making at the warehouse and remote work flexibility. I couldn't believe that after years of being told I'd never amount to anything without the family, that my education plans were selfish pipe dreams, I was suddenly interviewing for positions that valued my experience and potential. The shocking realization hit me during my first day at the new job when I looked at my direct deposit amount and didn't immediately calculate how many diapers and grocery bills it would cover. The money was mine, actually mine, to save and spend and invest as I chose. The humiliation I'd felt for so long about my financial situation started dissolving as I watched my credit score begin recovering from the fraud damage, points climbing each month as I paid down the debt Cassie had accumulated in my name. Justice had a specific dollar amount, apparently, and I was determined to reclaim every cent of my dignity along with it. Tyler adjusted to our new life faster than I'd expected, and watching him thrive in therapy and school was its own form of revenge against the system that had tried to convince me sacrifice without boundaries was noble. He started opening up about things he'd witnessed over the years. Grandma Doris coaching Cassie on how to manipulate me. Marcus making jokes about milking the Becca Bank. Conversations about how they'd all agreed I was too soft to ever really leave. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd known, had been more calculated and intentional than I'd wanted to believe, and hearing it from Tyler's perspective made me realize how completely I'd been backstabbed by people who'd convinced me that questioning them made me the problem. But it also showed me that Tyler had been carrying his own trauma from witnessing this exploitation. And getting him and the younger kids into proper counseling wasn't just about them. It was about breaking a generational cycle of manipulation that ran through our family like poison. The payback I'd fantasized about in those dark days before leaving had nothing on the actual satisfaction of building a life that proved them all wrong. 6 months after my escape, I'd been promoted to a senior analyst position, had paid off 2 of the 3 fraudulent credit cards, and was approved for a mortgage on a small house with enough bedrooms for the kids to have their own space. When the real estate agent handed me the keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come from achieving something you'd been told was impossible. This was my vengeance, living well, thriving despite their predictions of my failure, showing Tyler and his siblings that you don't have to accept abuse just because it comes wrapped in family loyalty. The truth was, I'd been lied to about what love looks like, and unlearning that programming was harder than any work challenge I'd faced. But the most profound change wasn't external. It was the day I realized I'd stopped feeling guilty for having boundaries, stopped apologizing for prioritizing my own well-being, stopped accepting that self-worth was selfish. Grandma Doris sent a letter from the nursing home, surprisingly not asking for money, but attempting one final manipulation, apologizing for misunderstandings, and suggesting that perhaps we could start fresh, since family was forever. I read it twice, looking for genuine remorse, finding only the same patterns of minimization and victimhood that had always been there. The shocking part was that it didn't make me angry anymore. I just felt sorry for someone who'd spent 72 years believing that control was love, and that guilt was an acceptable parenting tool. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it with all the other documentation of this period in my life, a reminder of what I'd escaped and why I could never go back. Cassie tried reaching out through mutual acquaintances, claiming she'd changed and completed court-ordered parenting classes and anger management, asking if she could see the kids. Tyler's response when I asked him about supervised visits was immediate and firm. No, she'll just try to manipulate everyone again. She hasn't changed, Aunt Becca. She's just better at pretending. His clarity about his mother's patterns was heartbreaking, but also empowering. He'd learned at 13 what had taken me until 27, that you can't help people who don't want to help themselves, and that protecting yourself isn't betrayal. The family betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had, paradoxically, taught him the most valuable lesson I could give him. That reclaiming your dignity isn't selfish, it's survival. CPS continued to support supervised visits in neutral locations, but Tyler and the younger kids consistently reported feeling anxious and manipulated during them, and eventually, Cassie's attendance became sporadic as she struggled with her own consequences. Then something unexpected happened that felt like the final piece of karma clicking into place. I received notification that restitution payments from Cassie's plea deal were being garnished from a part-time job she'd finally secured, and while the amounts were small, they'd continue for years. But more importantly, I set up educational trust funds for Tyler and his siblings, money that Cassie could never touch or manipulate or steal, ensuring that they'd have opportunities I'd been denied. The exposed truth of what healthy family relationships could look like was something I was actively building with these kids. Mutual respect, clear boundaries, love without obligation, support without exploitation. My revenge wasn't their destruction, it was my reconstruction. And as I looked at the life I'd built from the rubble of that family system, I realized that the greatest payback wasn't watching them fail. It was succeeding despite their absolute certainty that without them, I was nothing. They'd been wrong. And I was finally, beautifully, undeniably free. So here's what I need to know from you. Have you ever been in a situation where family obligation became family exploitation, where the people who claimed to love you most were actually the ones holding you back? Drop your story in the comments below, because I guarantee you're not alone in this. And sometimes just knowing others have survived similar betrayal helps you process your own. Tell me, would you have pressed charges against your own sister? Or would the guilt have stopped you even when you knew you were right? And if you've ever been the scapegoat in your family while someone else played golden child, I want to hear how you handled it, because that particular brand of family drama cuts different than anything else. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted committed identity theft or fraud against you? And if so, what did that moment of exposed truth feel like? The shocking realization that you've been systematically lied to by your own blood is something I wouldn't wish on anyone, but if it's happened to you, sharing your experience might help someone else find the courage to walk away. Comment below with your thoughts on revenge versus justice. Do you think karma handles these situations better than we could? Or is there a place for actively pursuing payback when you've been cheated and humiliated? And for those of you who've had to raise children that weren't yours because family members were irresponsible, I especially want to hear from you about how you set boundaries without feeling like you were abandoning innocent kids. Your stories matter, your experiences matter, and this community is built on people who refuse to accept that self-worth is selfish. So talk to me. Tell me what resonated with you in this video. What made you angry? What gave you hope? Or what reminded you of your own journey through family betrayal and reclaiming your dignity? And if this story opened your eyes to manipulation patterns you've been experiencing, if it gave you permission to consider that maybe you don't owe your family your entire future, if it showed you that walking away from toxicity isn't abandonment but survival, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these raw, unfiltered stories about the messy reality of family dysfunction, karma, and justice. Because next week, I've got another story about infidelity. Not the romantic kind, but the familial kind, that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty. These aren't just entertaining stories. They're survival guides for people trapped in situations they thought were normal, until someone held up a mirror and showed them the truth. So subscribe, engage, share your own experiences in the comments, and let's build a community of people who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own destruction. I'll see you in the next video. And trust me, the backstabbing in that story makes this one look mild.